Let's turn to Ambassador Dennis Ross now, former special assistant to President Obama and special advisor to the Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. He's also a Fox News contributor. Thank you.
My pleasure.
This action, though the president says, is to send a message to Bashar al-Assad, you must stop. Certainly, like any military action, is not without risk. Your assessment of it?
Well, look, you have a step that's been taken, and I think everyone who you've been talking to has talked about the message it sends to Bashar al-Assad. I think one of the things to keep in mind is it sends messages to a lot of other actors as well. It also establishes a certain principle. The principle is you cannot use chemical weapons with impunity. If we had not responded now, if the response had been only rhetorical, the message would go out to every other leader who gets into a conflict that, you know what, if you want to change the balance of power, you want to gain advantage, and you want to use chemical weapons, you can do that, and there's no consequence. Well, that makes this world a whole lot less stable. It makes it a whole lot more dangerous, and it ultimately threatens our security. So, number one, this was a very important principle to be establishing. It's not just the message you send to Bashar Assad. It's not just the message you send to the Iranians and to the North Koreans. When the administration says something, you better pay attention. It's not just words. Now, is there a risk of escalation? Yes, there's a risk of escalation. Bashar al-Assad may choose to say, you know, we're not going to be cowed by this, and he may choose to test the administration. However, when he thinks about whether or not he's going to test the administration, he has to consider whether or not he runs the risk of actually losing his Air Force, in which case, whatever advantages he has, suddenly those disappear. The Iranians could choose to do something more using Shia militias against our presence in Syria, our presence in Iraq. But if they do that, they're also playing with fire, and they also have to ask themselves the question, do they really want to put themselves in a position where they weaken what we might be doing against ISIS, which also threatens them? The Russians, too, might say, all right, let's test the Americans. But do the Russians really want to do that right now? Particularly when this is an accord that the agreement in 2013 was something that they worked out with us. They were one of the guarantors, and either the Syrians lied to them, in which case they look pretty bad, or in fact they turned a blind eye to it. What the Secretary of State was saying in terms of being complicit or being incompetent, I would say they're in a position where it looks like Assad may have taken advantage of them. Now, is this something that they want to be adopting as well, or is this the moment where in fact the administration could be going to the Russians and saying, maybe this really is the time to try to produce a genuine ceasefire and a real political process in Syria? The President said tonight that this is a good time to try to end the conflict in Syria. This could be, in fact, an opening to do that because it demonstrates that the U.S., when it's looking at Syria, and even though it seems focused on ISIS, we've just demonstrated that we understand that we can't turn a blind eye to what Assad is doing, and that if we do, the consequence is you're going to end up creating more recruits for ISIS. So here may be a moment as well, with whatever the risks are, this may also be a moment where you have done something on our part that demonstrates we're prepared not just to be rhetorical about Syria, and that could give the Russians an incentive to say, you know what, we've achieved what we need to in Syria. Maybe this is a time actually to produce a real political process for the first time.
History says the Russians often want some degree of compromise within these negotiations. They're very focused, among other things, on Crimea. Is that an area where the United States might be able to give and take?
Well, there's no doubt that what the Russians would love is for us to lift the sanctions on them. Their economy is hurting. You've actually seen a decline, a serious decline in the purchasing power of Russians. We've seen demonstrations now against corruption, which was, I think, kind of a surrogate issue to challenge, to express dissatisfaction with the state of the economy. So no doubt the Russians would be interested in that. The question is whether or not we need at this point to be broadening, in a sense, the aperture. Do we need to go beyond Syria, or has this step that the President has taken, that he has ordered in response to something that the Syrians did that crossed a threshold again? And again, it's not just barrel bombs, as horrific as they are. Barrel bombs are not chemical weapons. Chemical weapons are a weapon of mass destruction. We want to preserve a prohibition against their use. That was just broken. And again, it's a message that goes beyond just Syria. So with the Russians, I think we can focus on this. And I think, again, bear in mind that from Putin's standpoint, he's got an air base in Syria now. He's expanding the naval facility there. They have an air defense capability that creates an air defense umbrella over the eastern Mediterranean. He's seen as an arbiter of the future of Syria. He's seen as someone who is a major player, again, in the Middle East. He doesn't need to have an ongoing conflict in Syria that begins to drain the Russians. So again, this could be a moment not so much where you look for the broader grand deal outside of Syria, but you focus on something here, maybe in the aftermath of producing something here, if the Russians will show that for the first time they will actually impose on Assad, something they haven't done yet in this conflict. If they do that, then maybe we're in a different place with them as well.
Ambassador Dennis Ross with perspective from Washington. Ambassador, it's great to see you. Thank you.